You are watching DHTV from California State University, Dominguez Hills.
Okay, now let's return to the place where Africa, Europe, and Asia intersect and what progressive historians refer to as Afro-Eurasia. Now, after the Babylonian Empire dissolved, numerous groups came to dominate, conquer, enslave, incorporate diverse societies, and in the process they created a family of languages that came to be identified as Semitic. And these languages include Hebrew, Arabic, Aramaic, Phoenician, and Akkadian. Now, the first group was the Hittites. They conquered the Babylonians using light chariots and iron weapons. And they arrived as immigrants from the area of the Black Sea. And by 2000 BCE, they dominated Asia Minor, or what is known today as Turkey. In 1650 BCE, the Hittites centralized state power in their capital of Hattutas. Here they launched campaigns of conquest, decimating the Babylonians in the process. Now their rule lasted to 1200 BCE. And following the Hittites were the Assyrians. And around 9000 BCE, they migrated from the northern region of Mesopotamia and conquered the entire Fertile Crescent, using a variety of military technologies and techniques to destroy opponents. And due to the location of their homeland in northern Mesopotamia, the Assyrians had to struggle from their beginnings against powerful neighbors: the Babylonian Empire, the Egyptians, the Hittites, and the Sea Peoples. And this centuries-long fight for existence had a profound effect on the Assyrians, who became aggressors in turn, extending their own power and influence through brutal treatment of their neighbors. Horses, trained for warfare, tactically shocked their adversaries. Assyrians used chariots, iron weapons, and battering rams to destroy city-state barricades. The textbook provides you a vivid description of their notorious treatment of those who fought their expansion. They cultivated a reputation for violence so great that supposedly anyone who resisted them suffered a terrible fate: wholesale execution, pillage, rape, and enslavement. And by 650 BCE, the empire reached its height by controlling the entire Fertile Crescent, with Nineveh in the upper valley of the Tigris River its capital. Now, the fighting often threatened the empire, but the constant struggle continued and forged a powerful army. And in the hands of an able ruler such as Ashurnasirpal II, the Assyrians were able to turn their war machine on their enemies with great success. So this empire was going to be ruled by Ashurnasirpal II, and his son was ruled through oppression, and most importantly, the mass deportations of subject people. And as a result, the empire was often thrown into periods of revolt. It was an armed state, and it was based on the ability to spread terror and oppress enemies and subjects alike. So they took their name from their main deity named Ashur. And the religion of the Assyrians was likewise warlike. Worship was extended through military conquest, and holy war dominated the religious and military ethos. The brutality served them well in carving out an empire, but eventually that brutality turned against them. And after the death of a very powerful king, Assurbanipal, a coalition formed between the Medes of Iran and the Chaldeans, who launched a revolt against their oppressors, and they destroyed the capital city of Nineveh in 612 BCE. So the Chaldeans, the descendants of Hammurabi's Babylonian Empire, they regained control of their own city-state from the Assyrians, and in time extended control over the Fertile Crescent. Their greatest ruler was King Nebuchadnezzar. He added to the might and power of Babylon with new building projects, his most famous being one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, and those were the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. And most importantly, the Chaldeans are noted for their fascination with the stars, which resulted in the practice of astrology and the charting the movements of the night heavens. Then come the Persians. And the Persians emerged from Central Asia around 2000 BCE, and they migrated into present-day Iran. And as archaic traditions gave way to agricultural pursuits, the Persians became powerful and ambitious enough to conquer most of the Middle East. Excellent leadership was a core asset of the Persians, and through his superb military skill, King Cyrus the Great added the prosperous lands of Lydia and Babylon to his empire. And his policy of toleration allowed for conquered peoples not only a degree of self-determination, but also a chance to retain their identity. And this was especially important for the Hebrew people, whom he freed from Babylonian captivity. The toleration and good treatment of his peoples was a policy that Cyrus' successor, including Cambyses and Darius, continued. And it was policy that aided them in times of conflict, such as wars with Greece, in which the Persians were greatly aided by the support of their subjects. Now, the leader's dedication to the well-being of the empire was also a key in its success. And in addition to the Middle East, in 525 BCE, King Cambyses, Cyrus's son, conquered Egypt. But the greatest ruler of the Persians is reserved by historians for King Darius I, who ruled the Persian Empire from 522 to 486 BCE. And Darius divided the empire into provinces called satraps, which were ruled by governors or satrapies. He built the city of Persepolis into the most magnificent center of trade and collection of knowledge the Middle East had come to know. Darius's improvements and building projects included not only the imperial palace, but also a system of canals to assist merchants with trade in Egypt and irrigation systems to aid the farmers. Communication was superior thanks to his vast road system, which spanned 1,500 miles, and an accompanying postal system that was made possible by the creation of excellent means of travel. Now, unlike the Davidic kings of Israel, the Persian kings kept taxation low and modest while also regulating forms of tax collection, standardizing currency, and enforcing the law. The military success, tempered with domestic interest and a tolerant policy of rule, created a very powerful empire, and a stable one in stark contrast to the physically and economically brutal kingdoms of the era. All of this advancement slipped into decline, beginning with King Xerxes, the son of Darius. In an effort to expand the empire further, Xerxes tried and failed to conquer the Greek city-states in 480 BCE. So let's pause this presentation, and I'd like for you to go to view a documentary on the Persians from the History Channel's Engineering and Empire. So please pause, go view the documentary, and then come back, and we will continue. Okay. So, stability in the Persian Empire provided an opportunity for an ethical religion to take shape. Zoroastrianism developed from the teachings of a prophet named Zarathustra, or Zoroaster. Now, this religion relied on a collection of texts based on Zoroaster's teaching called the Avestas. Zoroaster taught that there was only one supernatural being that should be worshipped, Ahura Mazda, or the wise Lord. And there was another very powerful deity, Ahriman, the Dark Lord, who existed but should not be worshipped. So both good and bad events of the world were the result of this cosmic struggle between these two supernatural forces. So historians are convinced that Zoroastrianism's partial commitment to the concept of monotheism had a very decisive influence on the monotheism that's going to be found in Judaism and Christianity. Now, the next major group to influence the Middle East and then the Mediterranean world were the Phoenicians. And around 3000 BCE, they entered present-day Lebanon, Israel, and Jordan. This was an area identified as Canaan. Now, these people created a network of trade around the Mediterranean Sea with the use of strong, fast ships using sails, and the ships were made of cedar. Large centers of trade were located with strategic ports, and they were called Tyre, Byblos, Sidon, and Berytus. Now, over time, Phoenician expansion led them to colonize the Mediterranean Sea rim. And their most famous colony, Carthage, became a city of international renown. Heavy commercial trading led them to develop an alphabetic script around 1000 BCE. The script contained 22 letters, and when the Greeks challenged the Phoenicians in trade, the Greeks will adopt the script. And then when the Romans defeated the Carthaginians, the Romans modified it, and from there it became the alphabet that most of the world still uses today. So, again, pause this presentation and go to a documentary from Engineering and Empire series, and I just want you to watch the first 7 minutes of the Carthage episode to appreciate the importance of the Phoenicians. Just watch the first 7 minutes, because eventually we'll come back to Carthage when we deal with Rome. But after you view the first 7 minutes, then please return. Okay, another civilization of lasting note are the Lydians, who, like the Phoenicians, depended on trade and commerce to acquire wealth and power. And their influence is very important for us today because they created a system based on currency or coins instead of bartering or trading for goods. And then finally, we must appreciate the Israelites. And they, like the Phoenicians, were located in the region of Canaan. Their history comes from the Bible and archaeological records. And around 1900 BCE, Abraham, the source for the oral tradition found in the first 2 books of Genesis, is known as the father of the nation of Israel. Abraham left the city-state of Ur in the Fertile Crescent and settled in Canaan. A covenant between the supernatural was created, and Abraham obeyed. And Jacob, Abraham's son, raised 12 sons who became the leaders of the 12 tribes of Israel. And during a period of drought, they migrated to Egypt, were enslaved, and in a similar story to the Sargon redemption that we covered in the Mesopotamian presentation, Moses was also found in a basket floating in a river. And he led the Israelites out of Egypt and into the desert of Sinai. It is here that Moses introduced the foundational law codes of Western civilization. Those are the 10 Commandments. And back then, in the 1000s BCE, just like in the 20th century, the Israelites returned to Canaan, displacing the original inhabitants of the region, the Philistines and Canaanites. Now, it is the Davidic monarchy where the Israelites reached the height of their power and influence. And the 12 tribes were united in 1020 BCE under one king named Saul. The next king, David, created Jerusalem as the capital, and from there they enlarged the kingdom. In 961 BCE, Solomon, David's son, constructed a temple for the supreme deity, Yahweh, in Jerusalem. Thus, Judaism, the Israelite religion, had a home. Now, the Davidic kingship saw unparalleled growth in the power and prestige of the Hebrew nation. And under the rule of David, the Philistines, who had been weakened economically and socially by the decline of Egypt, were defeated, as were the Moabites and the Ammonites. David built the capital at Jerusalem, halfway between the southern tribes of Judah and the northern tribes of Israel, in order to avoid showing favor to any one area, but to unite the tribes under his rule and under the cult of Yahweh, who were centered in Jerusalem as well. Now his son Solomon continued David's ambitious building program and maintained a very impressive standing military. But this building and aggrandizing came at a great cost. David imposed a highly unpopular system of taxation and forced labor on his subjects, which his son not only continued but even increased. Solomon ruled as a despot, and ultimately his harsh oppression, which included conscription of his peoples and 4 months forced labor every year, proved to be too much. At the end of his rule, Solomon faced many rebellions, which turned into open revolt during his son's reign. In 922 BCE, the kingdom split into two, Israel in the north and Judah in the south. And divided and weakened, the Assyrians took over the region, followed by the Chaldeans, who enslaved them. The Persians saved them, but then they would soon be conquered by the Greeks. So it was the law code found in the Ten Commandments and the Torah, the Jewish holy writing, that made the Israelites accountable for their actions. So in this way, they introduced a better sense of equality for all people through an ethical, intellectual, and cultural foundation. So I'd like for you to conclude this presentation by watching a brief film clip from comedian and film producer Mel Brooks and get to know his comic rendition of the Ten Commandments as presented in History of the World, Part 1. And this will conclude the presentation on the Middle East.